Hi there, we're back to my doodle. And now I would like to show you the wet and wet technique. Okay, so in watercolor you can paint wet on wet, they call it wet in wet actually, or wet in dry. And what that means is either I'm using a wet brush and painting on dry paper, or I'm using a wet brush with paint and painting on paper I've already wetted in a certain area. So let's try over here. I have a couple little areas right here that look like they could use some color. So I think I'm going to use a cool color. So I'm going to get my little cool pot here. And so that you can see things, I'm going to move everything like this. Okay. And my water is so dirty that you might even be able to see as I wet it. So I'm using a mop quill, which has a lot of water. And you can kind of see this gray water because it's very dirty. Okay, so that little spot is technically wet, but you can see that it's kind of pooling. And there's just a lot of water there. So I'm rinsing out the rest of my brush, but let's see what happens. And actually, since I have this nice orange here, let's just use that. Let's see what happens if I drop this orange into it. Might need a little more water there. Because this paper is so nice, it's actually handling all of that. And so all I did was take a wet spot on the painting and then drop some paint into it. Now, check this out. Some paints behave differently. For example, I can take this phthalo blue and drop that in, and that will make cool things happen. It's not moving very much because I used I used a higher concentration of paint to water, a higher concentration of paint as compared to the water. But it'll keep moving as it moves around. So let's try that again. This time I'm going to use not so much water. I rinsed out my brush, but I kind of let the belly of the brush bleed out. So now I'm just painting this spot with water. And then let's take a look at my picture here and see what we might want to put in there. How about a neutral? Let's get a neutral color in there. I feel like this needs some more neutrals. So I'm going to go over here just to this messy part of my palette and kind of pick up just whatever I got here. Palette mud, we call it. Palette mud is good when you need neutrals. We can't just always have bright paint. Well, if you're David Hockney, you can, but that's very unusual. And now you can tell that the paint, if I just painted this, it would be that color. But because I'm painting it in water, I'm diluting it. So that's one thing to think about when you're painting wet in wet, is it's going to be lighter on the paper than the paint actually is because you're already diluting it with more water. On this one, let's go ahead and get a little blue and maybe just drop some more blue in to make something happen a little different. And maybe some of that over there too. I don't know why, because it's a doodle and we can do whatever we want. All right, let's do it again with, there's some nice places here. Let's do it again with a bigger spot. I'm gonna do this whole area wet and wet, and then I can paint the individual spaces more later. So I'm just taking water, letting it go around. And while that's kind of sinking into the paper, I can go ahead and mix something. Maybe I'll mix some more orange, since right now I only really have that in one place. Let's mix some more orange. And again, I'm going to make it a little thicker than I might need it, meaning slightly more paint, less water. And then look what happens there. Ooh, that is my favorite part of watercolor. And that will continue to move as we go around. And as it continues to dry, it will continue to move, and we can, and then I can paint over it later. Now I feel like we might need to add this orange someplace else, just because now I have it there and there. So let me add it here also, just so we have 3 of them. Okay. All right, let's do one more. I kind of feel like I want to leave that white for some reason. So let's do this one. So I'm just tapping out my brush a little bit, get some of the water out. And maybe it's time for some more neutral. So I'll go to my palette here and just get some of this stuff. Clean it out a little bit. Get a kind of pinky brown going here. You know, I realized at some point painting that this is why the tools that you use is so important, because the color mixing is kind of a time-consuming part of the process. And if you don't enjoy the tools that you're using, I don't know. It just makes it less enjoyable to me, I guess. And maybe some people wouldn't care as much, but to me, you know, using a natural hair brush, using nice paper, that's all just part of the enjoyment of the process to me. Now, if I want to charge in a little darker here, I'm going to take a synthetic brush, a smaller brush, so I can control the water a little better. And I can actually even dig at this a little better. I have some nice brown happening in these corners. And then I can drop in a little more. And I don't have to worry about softening it because it's wet, so it will just soften on its own. And now maybe I should go ahead and put this brown in a couple other places, just so we have some consistency. So let's put it here. Uh-oh, that was still wet. See, it's leaking into it. That's okay. That's why we do this in a doodle, so that we know that that's what will happen. And maybe over here, no. I can't really tell you why I'm making these decisions. It just has to do with how the overall picture looks to me. There we go. So now we have like 3 spots of brown. Maybe we'll do that little spot brown too. Okay. So that is wet and wet. Now, when would we use this technique? Well, we would use this technique when, for example, we're painting a petal of a flower. Well, you use this technique all the time. But let's say we're painting the petal of a flower. I can take some of this cobalt violet, I can drop it in, and then look what it will do. It will just start to make a super natural petal. There. And we can even drop in, you know, a little blue down here if we want it to be a little darker. Blue is not really a color that you would usually use on flowers, but for purposes of showing you how it would work. Now the reason that this blue isn't moving very much is because I took it straight out of the palette and put it straight in there, which means that there isn't much water in it. It's mainly pigment. And that's how you can, when you're adding color, it's good when the pigment is thicker if your paint is already wet. Because then it's not moving so much with the water and it will stay put a little bit more. But as we paint and as we go along, we see more and more reasons for just doing the wet and wet technique. Thanks.